One of the strangest sentiments that I commonly see is that when people post online about their experiences with the Orlando Disney and Universal parks, people often assert that Universal Studios Florida is the absolute worst of the bunch. They'll rank Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, Animal Kingdom, Islands of Adventure, and Epic Universe above this park, and often share the idea that it's only worth visiting specifically because of Diagon Alley. Which, fair, I do agree that this is the highlight of the park. In fact, I don't disagree that the park needs a lot of work either. I grew up with Universal Studios Florida in the early 2000s, fondly remembering classic experiences like Confrontation, Earthquake, Jaws, Back to the Future, and Twister, among a lot of other great supplementary attractions. I was really quite disillusioned with the direction that the park took starting in 2008, replacing Back to the Future with the clumsily implemented Simpsons ride, following the next year with the rough and weirdly themed Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, and then for the next 10 years, the park replaced almost every single classic attraction that made it great with screen-based simulators like Transformers, Gringotts, Race Through New York with Jimmy Fallon, and the infamously bad Fast and Furious Supercharged. In 2019, Universal really surprised me with the quality of Hagrid's over at Islands of Adventure, which, considering that Universal's last decade of attractions ranged from outright embarrassing to at best forgettably mediocre, it was like an entirely different company designed and executed what is a near-perfect ride. Since then, Universal has debuted a number of incredible attractions around the world, showing that they took negative guest feedback seriously about their over-reliance on cheap-feeling screen rides, and have really swung in a creative direction that feels a lot more interesting and ambitious. And yet, among all of this exciting creativity, Universal Studios Florida seems to have remained cursed to get bad attraction after bad attraction, replacing Shrek 4D with VillainCon Minion Blast in 2023, and then following in 2024 by replacing Kid Zone with DreamWorks Land, which feels done on the tiniest budget possible. Now granted, Universal did just tear down Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, and is replacing it with a Fast and Furious roller coaster manufactured by Intamin, which, considering their previous track record with Universal, will probably be great and a major draw to the resort. On top of this, the park is closing Fast and Furious Supercharged, which I think everyone can agree is a good decision. Still, among an oversaturation of screen-based rides, does that really make Universal Studios Florida the worst out of any Disney or Universal park? In my opinion, that's very clearly a no, because while it's easy to point to the park's flaws, and there's quite a lot of them, there are actually a lot of highlights here too that often get overlooked. To the contrary, I think that of the Florida parks, its closest thematic competitor, Hollywood Studios, is a far worse experience, filled mostly with disposable stage shows that should have left decades ago, and then having a small handful of rides, half of which are just not interesting, and are nowhere near worth the wait times that they receive, which are only as high as they are because the capacity of the park is abysmal. While Universal Studios Florida may have been cursed for over a decade to keep sliding downwards, it still manages to be a far better park for me, and so today, I wanted to compare both, highlighting the positives and negatives of each, and weighing why Hollywood Studios is easily the worst. Every once in a while, I'll get an interesting comment on a video from somebody saying something like, "You don't tell me to like and subscribe. I'll decide if I want to like and subscribe. You have to earn my like." And I think, hey, it's not that serious. I only mention it so that people who want to watch and like every video will remember to do so, which is something that I do myself with channels that I really like and consistently watch. Plus, while subscribers don't really affect your actual video viewership very much, it is really fun to see that subscriber number keep climbing higher, because as of making this video, the next milestone to hit is 200,000. So this is that reminder to like and subscribe if you want. But if you don't, well, it's really no big deal. Moving into the topic though, There very much was a period of time where I lost interest in Universal, because having experienced it when it was stacked with some of the coolest attractions ever made, it was really disappointing to see all of that ripped out for what are essentially a series of simulators. However, the park still has a lot to offer that people don't really give it credit for, so let's start with what is probably the best attraction there, Revenge of the Mummy. I consider this to be the last attraction from that classic era of Universal, as it opened in 2004 and still incorporates filmmaking into the story, as you're literally on the set for the movie. The queue itself, while short, is intriguingly creepy, atmospheric, and has a number of interactive elements that make for a bit of fun. For example, as you're moving through the tomb, you can place your hand on this chest, where through a lighting effect you'll be cursed. But if two people place their hands on at the same time, they'll instead invoke a protection spell that nullifies said curse. There's also the mirror that shows a live feed of the queue, where if you press the scarab button, it blows air and jump scares the people that are standing there. The rest of the queue has some other fun elements and decoration, but I also really enjoy the hanging statue of Anubis that you see from below the stairs, as well as when you get close to the loading area. It's such an interesting and impressive queue element that nobody ever talks about, but it's always very cool to see. As for the ride itself, while it absolutely makes no sense that you're boarding a roller coaster on a movie set, the attraction itself is just so absurd and exciting that the nonsense of the ride medium only really enhances the experience as one of the best indoor coasters ever built. There are plenty of beats on the ride that I look forward to, like the scene with Reggie as Imhotep pops out of the sarcophagus, the following segments where the mummified army jumps up from the sides, and then the dialogue where Imhotep yells, "Your souls are mine!" as the coaster launches into the gravity portion of the building. The actual coaster layout is fantastic and thrilling, while still being accessible to families, and the fake station scene where Imhotep disintegrates the ride operator before revealing himself and sending riders to their doom is just so weird and unique. On paper, nothing about Revenge of the Mummy makes sense, but because it's just pure fun and leans into the absurdity, it manages to be one of Universal's best attractions, showing that something doesn't have to be hyper-immersive to really resonate. I think for myself and many others, this is absolutely the highlight of the park. But Universal Studios Florida still offers substantially more, most of which always seems to go overlooked. Another stellar attraction that I never see people mention is Men in Black Alien Attack, arguably the best shooting dark ride located in any park around the world. While it's not the most sophisticated pre-show, the elevator segment is always a brief but amusing introduction to the Men in Black facility, and the queue has some great elements, including the animatronic annelids and the wide-open atrium. This was an incredibly ambitious reveal for a queue element in 2000 through its sheer scale, and for all the discussion about ambitious queues today, whether Rise of the Resistance or Battle of the Ministry, it's actually really weird how this never gets mentioned. What's also strange is that for such a fantastic ride filled with animatronics and so many moving elements, it also seems to fly under the radar for so many people, despite being one of Universal's best attractions. If you missed it and want to know my thoughts more in depth, I actually produced a video on this ride last year, breaking down its details and reflecting on why it's so overlooked, despite being what should be a well-regarded e-ticket. I think part of the issue is that when the ride opened, Universal just had nowhere near the same level of cultural relevance in the industry, and now that I think about it, even SeaWorld probably had better name recognition in Orlando than Universal did at the time. While the Men in Black IP feels a bit dated, I think that from a design standpoint, if the ride premiered today, it would probably be hailed as one of the best attractions of all time, purely through just how ambitious and well executed it is. While the maintenance of the ride today leaves a bit to be desired, it still has a lot of charm that shines through, and was wildly innovative for its time. On a similar note, another highlight of the park is the E.T. Adventure, a ride that does get recognized positively pretty often, especially among Universal Pass holders. I don't think it's the best dark ride in the world, and I would also say that nostalgia plays a large part in its popularity. But as the one remaining ride that opened with the park, it's still a very solid experience that brings me back to that original era, even with all the antiquated design elements. While the soundstage facade and pre-show with Spielberg can feel quite dated, I actually really appreciate that the experience starts off a bit meta, having been designed in the Ride the Movies era, where Universal mixed educational filmmaking with entertainment. It also feels a bit out of place in the park now, but I like the studio aspect to the park's theming, and I feel it's something that the park could lean into more to distinguish itself from Islands and Epic. Of course, once you step into the forest part of the queue, it appropriately gets a lot of love from fans, as it's such a unique and atmospheric thematic space that offers Easter eggs for fans of the film, and has an impressive animatronic of Botanicus, E.T.'s teacher, who makes a plea for riders to return E.T. home safely to the Green Planet. The ride first begins by flying through the forest like you would expect from the film, making for what I think is an exciting and thrilling segment despite the slow-moving ride system. After escaping, the ride stuns riders with a grand reveal of flying over a California diorama, which, while clearly trying to emulate London from Peter Pan's flight, is much better executed. The ride then brings you into space for a rapid transition, and then you land on the Green Planet, where as you witness lava and volcanic vents, it's clear that it's in the process of ecological collapse, and Botanicus reappears, urging haste. However, with the return of E.T., he revives his friends along with the dying planet, and the ride subjects riders to severe tonal whiplash, becoming what I've seen many people describe as a bizarre acid trip. The aesthetic of the revived Green Planet is quite interesting, combining what is a distinctly late 80s and early 90s maximalist overload with what is clearly inspiration from colorful coral reefs, creating something that is quite distinct and unique. As riders reach the end of the ride, they encounter E.T. one last time, bidding you goodbye personally by saying your name. It's such an antiquated element that often doesn't seem to work reliably, as I've often just seen him substitute people's names with friend, but the idea is still interesting enough to be worthy of merit, and I don't think I've ever seen anything else like this attempted in the industry. The ride then concludes with E.T.'s glowing finger and a return to the studio. But while I think that a lot of nostalgia is driving love for the E.T. adventure, as it's certainly nowhere near a perfect ride, it still excels in its atmosphere and really transports you back to old Universal Studios Florida, which really was something special. So, I've just gone over 3 attractions that I consider to be major reasons to visit the park, but what often seems to go overlooked are the shows. I'm not really a show person, but if someone were to tell me that they were going to just this park and wanted to know what I recommended, I think that the shows here are definitely must-dos. Well, not the Imagination Celebration in DreamWorks Land, because that really does feel half-baked and thrown together to babysit young children. But if there's one massively underrated attraction at the studios that needs more recognition, it's definitely the Bourne Stuntacular. This attraction premiered quietly during 2020 after the parks have reopened from the COVID shutdown, and I think that plays a large part in why it never developed any hype or cultural impact within the industry. Still, it is definitely recognized for its ambitious stunt work and clever stage effects that really advance theme park tech forward. And while the story is pretty thin and sometimes silly, it doesn't really matter because the production quality is so impressive. Bourne isn't a huge franchise with strong cultural relevance, but the show is absolutely worth going out of the way for, as it is arguably the best theme park stunt show ever produced to date. Close by, just down the row of Hollywood facades, is the Horror Makeup Show, an attraction that I'm honestly surprised still exists, because while it has gone through changes over the decades, I would still consider it an opening day attraction. If you haven't seen it, it's essentially a comedy show where actors playing special effects and makeup artists for Universal's horror movies walk the audience through how many of these effects are achieved. It's both educational and leans into the studio aspect that, again, I think the park should go back to embracing, but the comedy and surprises are what drive the show, because even if you know the jokes, it's almost more fun to watch the reactions of other audience members who clearly didn't know what they were walking into. While the horror makeup show seems well loved by locals and pass holders, it still isn't widely talked about within the industry, and yet it still continues to hold up as one of my favorite theme park shows. So yeah, this is absolutely a major reason to visit the park in my opinion. Finally, another opening day attraction that I feel is worth your time is Animal Actors, which is also another comedy show that this time features animals as if they're being trained for film. I would say that it's lightly educational and doesn't lean into filmmaking the same way that it used to, but the actual content of the show is really just a series of gags that, while many feel a little outdated in their humor, still manage to delight audiences regardless. People, and especially kids, always react positively to the various animals that make appearances, and it's always funny watching the audience get startled when birds fly overhead. I would say that, unfortunately, the animals are not trained nearly as well as they used to be a decade ago, but when things go wrong, that's actually a big part of the appeal, because who doesn't like it when an excited dog runs into the audience? I can see why people give this show a pass, especially since it's in a covered but still outdoor theater that's often sticky with humidity. But if you're only spending one day at just this park, I think it's very much worth your time. If I can recommend a good handful of attractions that I think are worthy of visiting Universal Studios Florida for, then why do people often write it off as the worst park in Orlando? The big issue is clearly the oversaturation of simulators or screen-based rides, and that's a complaint that I completely understand, as if you're riding everything, it can feel like a variation of the same experience over and over again. However, I think that the park gets a lot more hate than it really deserves, and if you look at most of these screen-based attractions within a bubble, most of them are actually really well designed. I think part of the reason that many of these attractions don't resonate is because they're so action-oriented, which means that they end up being overwhelming for first-time riders, and so they can feel a bit hollow because they can be difficult to process. However, as a local, I enjoy hopping on an attraction like Transformers, which through repeat ride-throughs, I've learned that there's a lot to like here, from the thrilling motion profile of the vehicle, to certain moments of vibrant dialogue and punchy sound effects. I often find myself liking Universal attractions the more I ride them, because once you get past that initial overwhelming sensory overload, there's a lot of beats and moments in the rides that reveal themselves as standout elements that I look forward to. A screen-based action ride will rarely ever stand with one designed with physical sets, but I think that they have their own merit that goes unrecognized because the park currently doesn't balance its ride lineup very well. That said, I think there are 3 truly bad screen-based attractions here, which are the Simpsons ride, Fast and Furious, and VillainCon. If you can look past those though, I'll say that Transformers is actually quite fantastic, especially since it rarely has high weights, and while a lot of people dislike Jimmy Fallon personally, I've defended this simulator in the past because it's actually executed quite well. It is very easy to walk onto. While I'm not the target demographic, Despicable Me Minion Mayhem is a perfectly acceptable simulator as well. Finally, there's Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts, a roller coaster simulator hybrid that could have been great if it didn't lose its pacing about halfway through. I think that Gringotts is a good, though not fantastic ride, but where it really shines is as a supplemental experience to Diagon Alley, which feels like the main attraction in this area of the park. It's such an interesting land with an excellent atmosphere and a good sense of discoverability, as there are moving elements and places to explore everywhere you look. And while I'm not the kind of person who seeks outdoor entertainment where you have to stand and watch, I was surprised to discover that I really enjoy the tales of Beetle the Bard and Celestina Warbeck on the stage here, which I think is helped by being undercover. I think if you come to the park and treat Gringotts as a major e-ticket to check off on a list, you'll be disappointed. But if you're spending time in Diagon Alley and taking in what it offers, Gringotts can feel like a great supplement to that experience, which helps with looking past its mediocre second half. I feel that as Universal Studios Florida continues to change, and especially when Fast and Furious closes, its screen-based attractions might be better appreciated in retrospect, especially if the park can change direction with a substantial dark ride or two. Personally, I think the Secret Life of Pets ride from Universal Hollywood would add a lot to this park, and with Universal seeming to learn their lesson from the screen era and knowing that guest feedback was negative, I'm optimistic that this park will finally receive interesting additions in the future. especially now that they can put a greater financial focus on it since Epic Universe has opened. Might have more positives to highlight about this park outside of just the rides and attractions, but since we're focusing just on that right now, let's move over to Hollywood Studios and see what it offers in comparison. I'm going to be upfront. Despite all the time and investment Disney has put into this park, there's very little that I actually enjoy doing here, to the point where I see it as the Disney park with nothing to actually do. I'm fine with the 2010's transformation of the park having removed the studio tour, as it was always half-baked from the start. But what really killed my interest was the removal of the Great Movie Ride, which acted as a thesis statement for the theming of the park. It was really up there with the best of Disney's classic dark rides like Pirates, Haunted Mansion, and Horizons. What that left for me to enjoy was Rock and Roller Coaster, which, honestly, I'm very optimistic about the Muppets conversion, which I think was a smart choice. And the Tower of Terror, an absolute classic that I continue to enjoy every single time. The design of the tower is iconic and fits the park really well. The interior part of the queue is wonderfully atmospheric, and the ride experience itself is still so charming and technologically captivating, carefully building up tension before the drop sequence. With the recent removal of Muppet Vision 3D last year though, another attraction that I had a lot of positive things to say about, the park just continues to offer less and less for me, and so, what's left? Well, initially, you might think of Rise of the Resistance, but if you know me, I think this ride is very much an equivalent to Gringotts. As in, I think the pre-show experience is more interesting than the ride itself, making for a good, but not fantastic ride. Unlike Gringotts though, I don't think that Rise benefits from the land it resides in, as Galaxy's Edge just isn't very engaging. It often feels like it's filling up space for the sake of filling up space. I think I'm long overdue for a thorough analysis of why Galaxy's Edge doesn't work, especially now that it's had a lot of time to age, so maybe I'll produce a video on it soon. But I just don't think that this is an interesting place to be, and I'm just not going to wait for Rise of the Resistance, because the ride often just doesn't feel worth the wait to me. Smuggler's Run is also a miss as well. I think it's telling that people often express how much they love the Millennium Falcon photo op in the queue more than the actual ride itself. The ride does seem to have some defenders, as people will say they've had a good time watching their kids crash the ship, with a group of people all yelling and having fun, but I personally had great experiences on Fast and Furious Supercharged, and that still doesn't mean the ride is actually worth your time. To Disney's credit, they do seem to be attempting to fix the ride and make it more interactive for other positions that aren't the pilots, but I still think that there are fundamental design issues that can't be fixed, and will likely leave the new version feeling underwhelming. Since we're on the topic of Star Wars, while I've loved Star Tours in the past, I think it's long past its shelf life and just isn't an asset to the park any longer. Since the park itself is very clearly challenged for capacity, I think it's telling that this ride consistently sits at a 5 to 10 minute wait. And I'm guessing the only reason Disney hasn't closed it is because it probably sells a decent amount of Star Wars merch outside of the sequel trilogy timeline. As for the rest of the park, have fun waiting an hour in the sun through countless switchbacks for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, an aimless dark ride with no real substance, with projections on mostly flat walls. I'm also not really a fan of Toy Story Land, as it's just a cheap, formulaic land that Iger has copy and pasted to quickly add attractions to various parks around the world without putting too much thought or budget into them. Slinky Dog Dash is one of the world's most underwhelming roller coasters, and Alien Swirling Saucers is a decent flat ride, but both receive wait times that are far too long to tolerate for the entertainment value that they provide, both through a combination of overselling Lightning Lane and not having enough desirable capacity within the park to distribute people more evenly. I'll give a shout out to Toy Story Mania for being well designed and a highlight of the park, but it's not a major reason for me to want to come here. That brings me to my main issue with Hollywood Studios, in that it feels like there's nothing to do. I'll go every once in a while specifically for Tower of Terror, and I think that the Muppets Rock and Roller Coaster could be great, along with the upcoming Monsters Inc. coaster potentially being good too. But otherwise, there are just no interesting rides here that are worth waiting for, and the park is otherwise supplemented by lazy or outdated shows that just aren't draws for me. The best of these might be Beauty and the Beast live on stage, which, as a Broadway-style adaptation of the film, has been running in this park for 35 years. It's not a bad show, but it's astounding that it's lasted this long, and is located in an outdoor theater that, like animal actors, may be covered, but can still be very sticky with humidity. You might be asking, well, what about the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular? And this is just a show that I do not understand the love for. Growing up with it, I thought it was great, and I was particularly fascinated by how it taught you about filmmaking. But now in a park where Disney has actively tried to remove the educational aspect and has turned it into a mess of random IPs, this show feels like an antiquated relic that's really out of place. The dialogue is lame, and the humor is stuck in 1989, with the show stunts also feeling a bit underwhelming, especially compared to pretty much any other stunt show produced by Universal, which is what it was trying to emulate from the start. I think it was very much a mistake to put Indiana Jones into Animal Kingdom for a myriad of reasons, but what frustrates me is that the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular should have been demolished a long time ago, and could have reasonably been replaced with an Indiana Jones e-ticket ride built for the modern day. Other undesirable shows in the park include The Little Mermaid, a musical adventure, which premiered in 1992 as Voyage of the Little Mermaid, as another Broadway-style adaptation of the film. It's nice that this is fully in the air conditioning, and has some neat stage effects and puppetry, but the show was recently updated in 2025 with fewer scenes, and introduces what I can only describe as bizarre CGI monstrosities. Moving on, a more recent show is For the First Time in Forever, a Frozen sing-along celebration, which is actually over a decade old at this point, even though it started as a temporary show. I know that people will defend the side characters here because they are genuinely funny, but half the show is literally clips from the movie where you're encouraged to sing along. And I have to think to myself, really? This is what we're paying Disney prices for? The park also contains Disney Villains Unfairly Ever After, which is essentially a popularity contest between Cruella de Vil, Captain Hook, and Maleficent, making for another show that's just pure filler as it has almost no substance. I should also mention the Shorts Theater, which shows a film called Vacation Fun, essentially splicing clips from the most recent take on the Mickey Mouse cartoon into another low-effort attraction that I would hesitate to even call a show. Unfortunately, other than Indiana Jones, Hollywood Studios is full of what I call babysitting shows, which are low-effort productions used to get people's kids to quiet down for 15 minutes. Although, judging from the constant screaming in the audience I heard, I don't think it even works all too well. In fairness, Universal does have one single show like this, with the DreamWorks Imagination Celebration, but that's it. So, between what are essentially filler shows, and a lack of desirable rides, other than the Tower of Terror, hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from when I say that Hollywood Studios is the Disney park with nothing to do. I see people that claim to love this park and have it as their favorite, but when I went here recently to update my footage, my observation was that everyone was miserable. I'm not being hyperbolic, because literally every 5 minutes, I would hear an angry mom yell behind me, "This is the last thing we're doing, and then we're going back to the hotel." Literally every 5 minutes. Hollywood Studios is just an absolutely wretched concrete heat trap with very few fun attractions, lines that are way too long because of inadequate desirable capacity, and a non-existent atmosphere. This is just a place that is not fun to be, and yet I don't feel that way about Universal Studios Florida at all. In fact, it's the opposite, filled with a vibrant atmosphere and hosting some of the world's best theme park events, only reinforcing my point that not only is it the better park, but it's not even close. What strikes me about Hollywood Studios, and really the rest of the Disney parks, is the lack of energy along the pathways. Yeah, it's here in a way that's limited, like with a few characters that still roam Galaxy's Edge, or the Green Army Drum Corps in Toy Story Land. But otherwise, the streetmosphere in this park has been cut to the bone. At Universal, it's the opposite, because no matter where you look, it feels like there's characters meeting everywhere in the streets, especially in Hollywood. And more importantly, outdoor shows happen frequently and often, creating a high-energy, party-like atmosphere in the front half of the park. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys outdoor shows in Florida, because you're often just standing there and sweating. But what works about this park is how often you just stumble across them, making them feel spontaneous because there are so many, all pretty much taking place right after one another. If you're walking through New York, you might stumble into Let's Go Dance It, a Latin dance show where the performers come together like a flash mob and take over the street. It's not something you should wait for, even though there are posted times for it on the app. But what makes it charming is that it feels random and brings a lot of life to the area. Nearby, you might spot the Blues Brothers driving in the street in the Bluesmobile. Suddenly, they'll get out and start performing. Or if you're standing over by Fast and Furious, construction workers will drive into the park and climb the scaffolding, introducing themselves as the Beat Builders for a comedic percussion show as they drum on all of the construction equipment. I don't know when this started, but it feels like it's been an enjoyable staple of the park forever that's always fun to catch when you see it. Over in Hollywood at Mel's Drive-In, Marilyn and the Diamond Bellas will dance and sing in a great performance that brings a lot of energy to the area. And while most of these performances are located in the front half of the park, I want to go back to Diagon Alley and again praise the tales of Beetle the Bard and Celestina Warbeck and the Banshees, both of which are far more engaging than you might expect. When you're walking through Hollywood, you'll probably spot characters from The Simpsons or the Scooby-Doo gang, but you might also encounter Beetlejuice harassing people in front of the horror makeup show. In front of Diagon Alley, you might encounter the conductor of the night bus who banters with the shrunken head. Or if you're over by the DeLorean, you might be approached by Doc Brown, who will wrangle you into some zany scientific nonsense. Beyond the sheer quantity of entertainment everywhere in this park, I've also encountered a lot of true spontaneity as well. For example, a few years ago, I was walking by Men in Black, where performers dressed as agents were comedically sneaking around the bushes looking for aliens. Or when Miniland was under construction, I saw entertainers dressed as construction workers, holding an impromptu meditation session in the middle of the street. This also isn't taking into account seasonal events that the park hosts, like Mardi Gras or the Christmas Parade, where the performers start the day out in the streets, interacting with people, taking photos, and just generally contributing to a party vibe, all of which is included with park admission. The Mardi Gras Parade is always a hit, the Macy's Holiday Parade adds a lot to the park near Christmas, and the Universal Mega Movie Parade, which runs through the summer, has some of the coolest floats I've ever seen, offering a wide variety of blockbuster IPs that satisfy both kids and adults. Does Hollywood Studios have entertainment like this? Other than some roving characters in Galaxy's Edge and Toy Story Land, the only other entertainment offering is Jollywood Nights, a paid Christmas event that includes a musical show with the Muppets, a Nightmare Before Christmas sing-along, and a special fireworks and projection show. The park also hosts various musical performances, although I have to look at what Universal is doing and realize that they both do a lot more, and it's included with the price of admission. On top of this, Universal does host its own paid event, Halloween Horror Nights, which not only introduces scare zones and entertainment everywhere throughout the park, but they build 10 new original houses every single year, spending what must be a significant amount of money on wildly creative storytelling experiences. While obviously a completely different event from Jollywood Nights, the discrepancy in value is stunning for what's offered. And of course, I have to go back to the point that Universal's other events like Christmas and Mardi Gras include a ton of entertainment and parades that are just part of the admission price. One last point I need to bring up is that Universal has a seasonal attraction known as the Tribute Store, a highly themed retail walkthrough that could feel more like an experience than an actual shop. No Tribute Store is ever the same, as they always explore a new idea, and every year, each shop coincides with the theme of the event, like Mardi Gras, Horror Nights, and Christmas, and often, a shop will appear that celebrates classic Universal summer blockbusters too. something that I hope returns for 2026. If you're a fan of themed entertainment, the tribute store is always great no matter what season it is, and they're always a highlight that contributes to the already strong seasonal parties that Universal puts on. To put things plainly, Universal's entertainment just blows Hollywood Studios out of the water, includes most seasonal events with admission, and has a far stronger atmosphere that feels a lot more fun and spontaneous, making this park a far better place to be, in my opinion. One of the biggest complaints I see about Universal Studios Florida is that the park itself is just a big mess, filled with generic lands that get lost among the rides, at least with the exception of Springfield and Diagon Alley. To be upfront, I don't think Springfield is even a good land, and only gets mentioned because of its brand familiarity, but otherwise, Diagon Alley is truly exceptional. However, what I like about the other lands of the park is that they lend themselves to the studio aspect. And while Universal hasn't always reinforced this theme when they've replaced attractions over the last 15 years, it's still present with the very visible sound stages, and it still plays a part in attractions like E.T., Revenge of the Mummy, Animal Actors, Race Through New York, The Bourne Stuntacular, and the Horror Makeup Show. So, if the park is still trying to sell itself as a faux studio, then I think the eclectic collection of what are essentially movie sets lend themselves to the park's identity, and don't really need to be anything more. Still, they don't lack depth, as you can spend a lot of time hunting for Easter eggs in the windows. But where the lands really shine is through the events that the park hosts, especially in New York, which is so flexible with what you can do with the area. Universal Studios Florida is the ultimate event hosting park, much better than Epcot in my opinion. And while some of its lands fail to stand out as attractions themselves, like you might find at Islands or Epic, there's still a lot that I enjoy about the atmosphere here. Another aspect that I haven't mentioned is that if the front half of the park is great for hosting events, then the back half is more serene and relaxing. The area that works as the stadium for Cinesational, the nighttime lagoon show, doubles as green park space during the day, allowing you to get away from the crowds and spend a moment or two relaxing on the benches. An issue that I have with a lot of people is that they treat parks like a series of checklists, where you have to mark off all the popular attractions, and fail to take the time to slow down and appreciate the atmosphere of the smaller experiences. You should definitely go for the big rides like the Mummy or Gringotts, but you should also take the time to get a crepe and sit in the park, which likely will have a light breeze blowing through it from the nearby lagoon. From there, you can walk out and maybe catch the end of Maryland and the Diamond Bellas, and then spend the next half an hour in the air conditioning at the Horror Makeup Show before moving on to a different area. Universal Studios Florida offers so much as a third space kind of park, and if you compare it to Hollywood Studios, I have to ask, is that a place you want to spend time in? I like how Hollywood and Sunset Boulevard embrace a romanticized version of the Hollywood that was, but it's clear that current Disney no longer cares, having cut all of the street entertainment and having replaced the shops with generic, disposable Disney merch, which means I now have no reason to explore them. Otherwise, Hollywood Studios has one single water feature with Echo Lake, but the rest of the park is otherwise just all concrete that draws heat to the ground, and I've heard many people describe Toy Story Land as if they were walking on the surface of the sun. Hollywood Studios just feels like a series of facades that go to the attractions that completely lacks an engaging atmosphere. And so, given the comparison between the two parks, I enjoy Universal a lot better. However, let's wrap this up and compare the attraction lineup. The only thing I'll go to Hollywood Studios for right now is the Tower of Terror, and I'll remain cautiously optimistic that the new Rock and Roller Coaster will deliver. Also, sure, I'll throw in the Brown Derby as an attraction, because it's one of my favorite in-park restaurants. However, while there are some attractions that I enjoy, like Star Tours or Toy Story Mania, they're never a primary draw for me, and the rest of the park is either lazy or outdated shows, or attractions that are fine, but never worth waiting for unless the park is empty. There's just very little reason for me to want to come here, but when compared to Universal Studios Florida, there's so much more over there that I enjoy. Revenge of the Mummy, Men in Black, and E.T. are all classics, and despite the park's oversaturation of screen-based rides, I still really enjoy Transformers and will wait for Gringotts if the wait is under half an hour, which it often is, because the park handles its capacity a lot better. I also can't visit the park without doing either Bourne, horror makeup, or animal actors, and a lot of attractions that have a bad reputation like Race Through New York really don't deserve it, and always seem to surprise people and subvert their expectations. The park certainly isn't perfect. It has notably bad attractions like Fast and Furious, VillainCon, The Simpsons Ride, and the entirety of DreamWorks Land. But I'm coming out of this video recognizing that the park is very strong in other areas too, especially with its atmosphere and entertainment. Further, now that Epic Universe is open, I'm optimistic that this park will start receiving high-quality additions with a serious budget behind them, and Universal has a mostly positive track record since the opening of Hagrid's, leaving me excited that this park will finally start the process of fixing its weaker areas. It's always weird to me that people write off Universal Studios Florida as the worst park in the state, because it's really nowhere close, and I think the problem is that people go in expecting to check off e-tickets on a list, which doesn't really play to the park's strengths. Hopefully, through this video, if you didn't like the park before, I can convince you to approach it with a new set of eyes. But even after all this, if you still don't like it, let me know why, because I'm ready to fight. Still, I think most people would have a hard time arguing that Hollywood Studios is the better park when it has so little that's interesting to do. And if we're comparing the worst attractions of each, I would rather take Fast and Furious Supercharged over watching Mickey Mouse movie clips spliced together. So let me know your thoughts. Please leave a like on this video if you want more people to watch and agree that Universal Studios is the better park, and I encourage you to hit the subscribe button with bell notification so as to be alerted to new videos as they're released.